This is What's the Issue, a podcast from the Marks School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College, where our faculty experts dive into today's most urgent topics, challenging assumptions, debating ideas, and offering fresh perspectives. The topic of today's episode is Mamdani on Education. In this episode, our host Marks lecturer Marco DeSena is joined by Marks professor Judith Kafka to discuss the future of New York City's public schools under new mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani. Marco teaches courses on American government and New York City government and politics here at the Marks School, and, as a consultant to the League of Women Voters of New York, is passionate about civic education and engagement. Professor Kafka focuses on the relationship between schools and social and economic inequality. Her popular courses at the Marks School address the politics of school reform and education policy. Dr. Kafka's first book was on the history of zero tolerance in school discipline, and she is currently working on a project exploring the role of schooling in the history of Brooklyn. Let's get started.
Hi there, I'm Marco DeSena. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, my Marks School colleague, Judith Kafka. Hi, Judith.
Hi.
So today we're talking about education.
Yes.
In New York City, specifically with regard to incoming mayor Zohran Mamdani. During the last podcast, when I talked with Tom Main, I introduced to talking about how New York City is unique regard to homelessness. We were talking about right to shelter, state constitution. The same could be said about education. New York City is unique with regard to education, right? It has the largest, it is the largest district, right?
It's massive. There's just nothing like it anywhere else in the nation.
906,000 students, the largest school district in the country, 1,597 teachers in the, schools in the system, right? But it is unique in New York State and in New York City in some aspects, is it not?
You mean for mayoral control?
Mayoral control, yeah.
So I think Yonkers has a version of mayoral control. So New York City was one of many cities across the nation that got into mayoral control in the 90s. It was not the first. Giuliani tried to get it, was not able to. Bloomberg was able to get it.
On day one.
So several of those cities now have since receded a little bit. Chicago just switched away from mayoral control this year,
right?
Through a gradual process. So there still are some cities. DC still has mayoral control. So in that sense, it's not totally unique, but it's pretty unique.
Right.
Yeah.
And this recent campaign was fascinating for so many reasons. I tried to look back at some public opinion polls historically and this year, just to look at what voters cared about, what they said they cared about. Education usually ranked pretty high. It didn't rank as high this year. Education used to be a pretty big talking point for mayors running for mayoral candidates running for office. It kind of wasn't. It wasn't this year.
It was not.
It was not.
It was not a talking point at all this year.
Do you think we know, based on comments made during the campaign, comments made since the election, people he surrounded himself with, do you think we have an idea of what Mayor Zohran Mamdani's education policy will look like?
I don't think we do. No. I mean, we can make some guesses. I mean, the big headline is that he really didn't focus on education at all. The few things that he did say, either out loud or in a questionnaire, he often partly rolled back. It just isn't a priority. It wasn't a priority. And it wasn't really a priority in the last mayoral election either. Adams didn't have much of a education platform, but the two before, de Blasio ran on education, Bloomberg ran on education. So Mamdani did not. So in that sense, there's less pressure, right? Because he didn't really make a lot of promises around education. He has said, so de Blasio put together this committee pretty late in his time in office to investigate issues of school segregation in New York City after getting a lot of pressure on that. It was not something that he ran on. It was not a huge focus of his. So that committee came out with two pretty well-regarded reports towards the end of approving contracts. Other than that, it's mostly symbolic.
And they're appointed by the mayor, and the mayor fires them if they're not in agreement with.
So that happened under Bloomberg,
yep.
and the composition of this PEP has changed since then, partly because of that. So the PEP has gotten bigger and a little bit more democratic over the past 20-some years. So the mayor technically doesn't appoint the majority. I think the mayor appoints 13 of 24 members, and then there's the borough presidents get to appoint some. These localized parent representative groups get to elect some, and then there's some that the legislature appoints. So it's complicated, but I wouldn't say that it's democratic.
But is it fair to say that prior to this campaign, was Zoran Mamdani assemblyman? Was he a critic of mayoral control?
I don't think there's really much record of him at all. It's just public education has not been his focus. It just has not been.
Right. Fascinating. And so is there anything that other, I guess there's nothing really then we can point to other than we'll have to wait and see.
I think so.
Yeah, what he does.
Yeah.
Can you tell, what does it mean to you if someone wants to be, I keep seeing this term coming up when I was just reading about past elections, the education mayor. What does it mean to be an education mayor?
Well, it depends on the mayor, right? Yeah. But I mean, certainly Bloomberg ran on that, right? He said, I'm going to fix the schools. Put me in charge of them, and I'm going to fix them. And I'm going to radically change how schools are organized in New York City, how they're run. And you can hold me accountable for how well the schools are doing. You can hold me accountable for test scores. This was during the accountability era where people were really focused on school test scores as somehow an indicator of how well schools were doing. And he said, hold me accountable for that. And whether or not people did, I think this is one of the tricks with mayoral control. People vote for all kinds of reasons. Most people are not a single issue voter.
Sure.
So you might say, he's doing a great job on schools, but I really don't like what he tried to do with congestion pricing, so I'm not going to vote for him, right? Or vice versa. So it's hard to know if people reelected him twice because of education.
Sure.
I think that would be a hard case to make, and I certainly wouldn't have data to support that. His reforms became increasingly unpopular. They started out being unpopular with teachers. They became increasingly unpopular with a lot of families. And by the end, de Blasio ran saying, I'm going to undo a lot of what Bloomberg did. And that was a popular message also. So to be an education mayor, I think, is a mayor who really focuses on schools. And similarly, you might say we've had some people who said they're going to be educational presidents, right?
Sure.
And that's
George W. Bush, right? Yeah.
That's their focus, and or a focus, and also I think often indicates a belief in schools as a pathway to social reform, maybe economic reform.
Right.
And so I think you could, or I, as someone who focuses on education policy, find it frustrating how little Mamdani said about schools, and am disappointed with how little interest I think he has in the schools. At the same time, I do appreciate the fact that he's not saying the way to social mobility, the way to economic mobility, the way to social justice and economic justice is through schools.
Why?
Well, it's asking schools to do a whole lot. Yeah. And, it is in the United States, we sort of, if you think about this idea that the nation has in general in terms of the idea of the American dream, the idea that, okay, if we make everything fair for you, we make sure everyone's got a good education, then you can make whatever you want of yourself. And if you're successful, that's great. You've earned it by doing well in school. And if you're not successful, you had the opportunity and you chose not to take it. That's kind of our social welfare state mentality. Right? And the question is, can you really level the playing field through schools when kids are entering schools with such gross inequalities in their lives?
So much else going on in their life that you have to address. Yeah.
Right. And also just the sort of the idea that you're going to take kids who are, suffering from not just poverty, but all the negatives that go around poverty, and you're going to put them head to head with someone with every privilege and then say, great, let's just see what happens, right? So I appreciate that Mamdani is focused on economic factors for economic justice. If you say you want to make the economy more fair, I appreciate that he's not saying, the way we're going to make it more fair is by making sure that every kid has a chance to get a job by doing well in school.
And you think that's intentional on his part?
Well, I just think I just think that's not where his focus
Right.
is, right? Because I do think that if you say, okay, what are the things, I think what he has said is, what are the things that someone could do as mayor to make New York City more economically just and work better for working families? And he's laid out what he thinks will help. So the thing that's most education adjacent is universal childcare. Right. And, de Blasio said universal pre-K.
Yep.
And that pre-K is more educational in the traditional sense than childcare, right? Because pre-K is supposed to be giving kids this educational foundation.
Some educational component, yeah.
But it's also freeing working parents to go to work without having to pay for
also
childcare, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what Mamdani's focus has been on. How can I help working families by making sure that they don't have to pay for childcare so their children can be taken care of in a way that's safe and positive then they can go to work.
That wouldn't be put on the Department of Education. Probably not.
No. I mean, I think they're going to end up, if they do roll it out, they're going to end up really looking at how the de Blasio administration, and that's clear already from some of his appointments,
Yes.
right? How the de Blasio administration rolled that out. And one of the things the de Blasio administration did, also looking at what other cities have done with universal pre-K, is said, we already have a lot of pre-K.
Yeah.
And how can we sort of expand the city system to include those without taking them over?
Right.
So you can imagine
The local groups, the community groups.
Yeah, and existing childcare centers becoming part of city childcare centers.
Right.
And you could imagine there'd be some schools adjacent things happening depending on, you could imagine childcare centers existing where there are pre-K centers,
Sure.
right? I imagine it's going to be really a mix of things.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's not, the thing about schools is if you say, all right, I'm not focusing on schools for social justice, or I'm not saying schools is the way to make sure that everyone has a place to live and food on the table. Right. But if you're mayor of New York City, you're still in charge of this giant school system.
The largest,
so you
the
still
largest
need
in the country.
You still have all these kids going to school. You have all these teachers teaching them. You have decisions you have to make about curriculum. You have decisions you have to make about enrollment policy. You have decisions you have to make about teachers' jobs. There's all kinds of decisions that you have to make that might not be focused on economic justice, but they still need to be made.
Sure. And it could eclipse so many other things if things go wrong.
Correct.
Or if it takes over the agenda.
And there's safety issues
Sure.
there. Early on in Adams' term, there was a huge storm, I'm sure many of you remember, with all this flooding.
Yep.
And the school system needs to have systems in place to respond to that, to communicate with parents, to say, should parents be picking the kids up from school? How are we keeping kids safe? What's our, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
That's really important that you need a bureaucracy like that to be prepared to do. And they were not prepared to do that.
So my next question, why would anybody want to be mayor? No, I'm kidding. So one of the things we also talked about in the last podcast, and I think you would talk about on any, again, if you're talking about education, if you're talking about mayors, is that there are other constraints, right? In New York City, there are lots of constraints. Two big ones are out of the city, in Albany and in Washington. What could be the effect of the state on Mamdani's educational plans, or whatever they might be? What is the role of the state there? The relationship with the governor? And also, I guess we could get into the Trump aspect of it all with education.
I mean, the state has a lot of control over the schools.
Sure.
The right and responsibility, the right to a public education is in the state constitution. The state is responsible for providing public education, and they give all this authority and control to localities to run their schools. But that is state controlled.
Right.
Mayoral control is state controlled.
Right.
Not just the governor, it's legislative. A lot of the stuff is legislative. So
the state granted New York City passed a law allowing the mayoral control of schools.
Correct.
Right.
And the mayor now has to go back every year and ask for it again and get the state legislature to vote to renew it, maybe with some changes. So less the governor, but more the legislature has quite a bit to say. The funding, most of the funding comes from the state. So how the funding is allocated, all the rules around funding allocation, a lot of that is, not all of it, but a lot of that is controlled by the state. Currently, there's a big hot topic around class size reduction. Class size reduction was passed by the state, and there's a lot of debates. A lot of the people who were in favor of it and pushed for it are here in New York City, but there's also a lot of folks here in New York City who think that the way it was passed is counterproductive, or that it's going to end up harming the kids in communities it was meant to help the most.
Can you talk a little bit about that? So what was passed specifically saying? It was limiting, right, class size to a certain.
It has right, and it's universal,
right,
and what that means is in New York City, we have space constraints, right? So there are some schools that are very, very popular. There's lots of kids there, or they're in neighborhoods with lots of kids. It can be very difficult to reduce class sizes in those schools when there's no more space, right? So you're going to have to limit how many kids can go to those schools. One argument has been that if you look at where class sizes are already very small, they tend to be in schools that you might call struggling. So there's just not as many kids there. Those classes are already small. Those schools aren't going to be getting any more funding, any more faculty or anything like that. Where big schools that, in some cases where a lot of people want to send their kids, they have made the decision, I'll send my kid to this school even though there might be 35 kids in the class because I think it's worth it, right? So there was a push to try to get some exceptions for high achieving schools or more popular schools. And there are essentially, like if you look at Adams just got, and I don't have the numbers on top of my head, but they were just able to file for a bunch of exemptions for a lot of schools currently. But the existing law is still in place. And that's a law, again, that was passed at the state level with a lot of input from both sides of New York City, but New York City doesn't control the law. It has to comply with the state.
Considerable constraints there. And also in Washington, to a degree, does Washington have any effect on local local educational policies?
So
even before Trump.
Right. So traditionally, historically, no. We get about 10% of our budget nationally from Washington for our schools. In New York City, it's actually a little bit less just because we get more state funding and local funding. So in states that don't give as much money to the schools, a larger percentage comes from the federal government, but it's still just around 10%. During the Bush administration, there were a lot more strings attached to that money with the idea of requiring schools to do testing in a certain way and use certain tests for testing and report out the data in a certain way. So that created more strings attached to that money. When Trump ran both times, he said that let's just take the current administration. He said that he wanted to, get Washington out of the schools, return local control, reduce those strings, reduce bureaucracy. But at the same time, he and folks in his administration want more control over what goes on in schools. There is not a legal mechanism for DC to do that. There's not a legal mechanism to say you can teach this material, you can't teach that material. That's not up to Washington, DC. Does that mean that it has an influence? It probably still does, right? Indirectly. And also
withholding funding, bullying.
So they can't legally withhold funding, but what they can do is
over something else.
Right.
So
So they've been threatening to investigate or withhold funding around transgender children's rights, for example. Again, they don't really have a legal standing to do that, but it creates a lot of headache and all kinds of things. And currently, our current administration was willing to fight back with DC on that stuff. So we'll just have to see going forward.
We will, right? We will. So you mentioned something before when you said that it sort of disappointed with how little education policy was talked about in the campaign. Is that on the media as well? And on the, and this is a weird question. I wasn't really prepared for this. I'm just sort of wondering why, right? Why is it not as big on the conscience? Was it the time of year? Things going well? What was it? Was it just the personalities that are going on right now?
I think that's
that kind
a great
of eclipsed
question.
That?
I think most of it was that the candidates weren't really focused on it, right?
Yeah.
And in particular,
none of them really. Yeah.
Right. But honestly, Mamdani ran the show, right? He ran the media narrative.
Right.
It didn't, anytime anyone talked about the mayoral campaign, even if they weren't talking about him at all, his agenda was the agenda that framed every conversation. So I will say, when we were on a panel together, I said, gosh, Mamdani's kind of weak on education.
Yeah.
The other candidates are noticing that he's weak on education. The other candidates have really extensive education policies that they've put out, platforms. He's got nothing. The media's starting to pay attention. I think we're going to see a lot in education, and we still didn't.
Nothing.
Because the truth is, the other candidates didn't have a lot that they wanted to say either.
Right.
And it's an interesting question in terms of, are schools going so well that people weren't saying, fix the schools, fix the schools, fix the schools? I mean, I think there might be some of that. The current chancellor is a very competent leader for the schools, right? So she was appointed after the previous chancellor had to resign because he was wrapped up in all these accusations having to do with corruption.
Corruption charges, yeah. And the current chancellor, Melissa Avalos Ramos.
Right,
yes.
correct. So, and something similar happened during de Blasio, where they get a woman with a lot of experience in the system, super competent, and everyone just kind of breathes a sigh of relief because she's run the schools well. A lot of the stuff that was getting a lot of pushback from that banks did kind of just sort of got quieter,
fell to the wayside.
disappeared,
Yep.
right? But at the same time, she wasn't asked, what's your vision? What are the big, massive changes you want to do? So we're just kind of keep on keeping on.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people, especially if you're a parent in the public school system, if you're a teacher in the public school system, there's some stability with that.
You want that.
Right?
Yeah.
There's some sort of, okay. And also, this is a person who understands how schools works. This is a person who hasn't come in, with bells and whistles and the lights. This is someone who we trust to sort of get the day-to-day stuff done.
Right.
And so it hasn't, perhaps if Banks had still been chancellor and maybe the schools would have been a hotter topic. But I do think that is probably part of it, that there wasn't a lot of constant outrage about the schools.
Right. And it can be exhausting to go through every 4 years these big educational promises and these changes and these plans and the slogans and the reorganizations and all this stuff.
Right.
So
and often chancellors won't last 4 years, although de Blasio's, his first one did, but then his second one didn't.
Right.
And, so then you're getting a lot of change. Yeah, and if they constantly want to make their mark by saying, I'm going to undo what this person
exactly
did.
Right. Yeah. Which I can understand that they want to make, but at the same time, you can understand from the perspective of the students, the teachers, the principals, and the parents, community members, that they want some stability there.
The hottest topic really is about how students get assigned to schools. Right. So most children K-8 still go to their local, what you might call zone school. Although that has decreased somewhat because we have more and more options, even at the K-8 level, to go to a school outside of where you live. But where things start to get controversial and dicey is at the middle school and especially the high school level. Yeah. And that's changed. It was changed considerably during Bloomberg. It's been changed a lot since. COVID changed things because some of the ways that students were applying to and getting admitted to schools during COVID had to change. But we still have a system for high school, at least, where, and in many sub-districts within New York City, middle school, where children are competitively applying to get into schools in a system that is, and it's like college admissions, but in a lot of ways it's worse because you just get assigned one at the end of the day. So that is going to remain controversial, and that's probably going to come up every fall and every spring.
Right. And Mamdani hasn't really signaled much on
so
that?
At one point he said that he would be interested in getting rid of the standardized test that is used for admissions to the specialized high schools.
Yeah, which is...
Of which there are only...
a small number.
The very small number, 11. There's only 11. There were historically 3 plus LaGuardia, and then Bloomberg added a bunch.
Right.
And Mamdani went to one, which he was admitted to by taking this test.
Right.
And it is in a state law that for 3 of those schools, the state test is this test is the only thing that determines whether or not someone gets into that school.
Right.
Those schools are not representative of the city in race or class, and they're always controversial. And that will come up every year.
Right, and it's such a small number of schools and students. It's right, but it's
tiny, but it's
symbolic.
High. It's symbolic, and and the media plays into this by calling them the best schools or whatever. And what they are is hard to get into.
Right. Certain media, yeah. And he also waded into the debate over gifted and talented programs for kindergartners?
Right. So he or someone on his team
Right.
answered a questionnaire from the Times.
Campaigns get sent, candidates get
Yeah.
sent these questionnaires, these surveys from all types of organizations,
Yeah.
right? From all these different.
I mean, it was the Times, so you think they'd
That's
pay
right.
attention.
But they fill them out, or they have their staff fill them out, or someone
Yeah.
who fills them out according to their priorities, their policies,
Yeah.
and whatever the candidate even knows about it or not.
Right.
It's
and also
unclear.
it's yes or no in this case. So there was no
Got it.
explanation. So the question
Oh, I
was
missed
something
that. Got
like,
it.
would you be open to getting rid of gifted and talented in the elementary grades, which was a recommendation from this panel that I
That's
mentioned
right. Yep.
earlier from the committee in the report. And they had checked yes.
Right.
Or he checked yes. And then when this kind of blew up, they backed it up a little bit and said, kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
And New York City is very unique in how it does gifted and talented
it
classes
is. Sure
across
is.
the nation is very unique. It is unique that it uses a test for admissions, but it actually had stopped already using the test for admissions in kindergarten. And so it's a weird, and for first grade, they're not using the tests and admissions for those programs anyway. So his proposal is to not have separate classrooms or schools for children who've been identified in some way as quote unquote gifted for kindergarten.
But again, we're talking about a really small number, right? This isn't education policy.
Correct.
These are these little sort of political fires that are being put out as opposed to So there's so much made about Mamdani being a member of the Democratic Socialist Party, right? He's a Democrat, ran as a Democrat, but he identifies as a member of the Democratic Socialist Party.
Mm-hmm.
The Democratic Socialist Party of New York is pretty significant now. They're a pretty big player, especially now with the recent talk of their candidates challenging, primarying other Democrats and whatnot. Does that affiliation, the DSA, do they have any major education policy goals?
Well, since I saw that you might ask me about this, I spent some time yesterday looking, and it's very consistent with Mamdani. They have very little about education, and what they do have is for K-12, universal access to preschool and childcare, and then they want free college education, including room and board. So
free college education, including room and board.
Yeah, that's what's on their website.
Be nice.
Yeah,
I'd like that.
That's right. But that's what's on their website. But in terms of education policies, the kinds of things that you need for running schools, that's just not their focus. Which again makes sense if their focus is on economic justice. Of
course.
What teachers teach in schools or who goes to which schools they're less focused on.
Absolutely, sure. It's just now that he's the mayor, he has to know. Would you, if you were making betting odds maybe, or I'm not sure, who do you think his next chancellor is going to be? You think he sticks with?
Don't know. I think if you asked me a week ago, I would have said I think he's sticking with the existing chancellor.
Really?
Just based on what I'm reading in the papers, right? And a lot of it is people reporting each other's stories. So this summer, someone came up, I know exactly who. Someone in the Times came up with a list of rumor has it names. And some of those names were just lazy names that people were pulling out of nowhere. This person sits on an education committee. They could be chancellor. And these are not people who are qualified to be chancellor, right? So the actual serious candidates on these lists are very small. There is a question of would they bring someone in from the outside. New York City is a complicated place, and I think it would be really hard for a real outsider to come in all of a sudden and take over.
We export a lot of chancellors. We do.
I think it's
we
probably
export
much
police
easier
commissioners
to go,
and chancellors.
Much
we don't
easier to go elsewhere.
Right. We don't really import them as much. We import our transportation heads a lot, but we rarely.
Well, and de Blasio's second chancellor. I mean, there's a lot of complicated things going on with him, but I think he really didn't understand New York City, and that was painful. I think a lot of stuff he wanted to do would have been great, but he didn't understand local politics.
Right.
And it was hard for him to pull it off.
And to go from someone who is currently in the role and who has relationships, Chancellor Ramos, to go from...
I mean, what he might do, what some people are hoping he's going to do, is continue her position for now while opening up some kind of more public process for finding an appointment. Could be her, or could be somebody else with more public input down the road. He might do that. It just seems, that's a lot of time and effort. My sense, I've never met him. I know people who are advising him, but they have not shared they don't advise him directly, but they're doing some of the transition work. I just don't think he cares, and I don't mean that flippantly. It's not his priority. So he wants to get someone good, a chancellor he can trust that's not going to cause him a lot of headaches or whatever, and then let that person do.
Who's aligned with him ideologically, or at least on major principles, and to run this. Right. If you had to forecast it out, going the next few months or year or whatever, what do you think of the major education stories in New York City regarding Mayor Mamdani? Is it this school, the selection one? Is it charter schools? Is it?
Yeah. So, okay, that's great.
Control?
I think it's going to be two things. I think it's going to be this class size reduction story is going to keep getting bigger. Because the ability to get waivers and kind of get more time to make some of these classes smaller they're going to have to figure something out. They're either going to have to go to the state and get some more permanent answers. Meanwhile, as enrollments go down, the pressures are going to be different in different schools, right? So I think that that's going to be something that he's going to have to actually deal with, regardless of who's chancellor. They're going to have to deal with that together. And then because he has hinted that he's interested in trying to reduce racial and maybe socioeconomic segregation within New York City schools, I think that they will try to do something at the margins around that. But I think they're going to be pretty careful.
Right. Smart. Yeah.
I guess. I just don't see him taking on a massive overhaul of the school system because he didn't run on that.
Absolutely.
And it's not what he's invested in.
And it's one of the few areas where the local media really love to play it up and pick a fight. And it's like a snowstorm every day, basically. They love to play that part of it up, and it could get dragged into the mud.
It can. I think the thing about education is there's sort of the big grand view of education, and then there's all these parents who have children, and they care so much about their children. And they believe correctly or incorrectly that what schools their children go to and their children's experience at those schools can set them up for a life of opportunity or close off opportunities for them. And then there's other parents who are focused more on safety or more on cultural values or any sorts of things. And everyone wants to be able to sort of make sure that their vision for their kid is enacted in the schools. And so there's just a lot of anxiety. And the media plays up on that because it gets clicks. And it's not unimportant. It's very important. But the media often, I think, is not responsible in the way that it reports.
And it's also one of those rare areas where there is infighting among members of the same party, which again, another thing the media loves to do. When there's infighting, hey, he's your colleague here saying this and this, and
education policy historically, until very recently at the national level, has really not followed the parties.
Absolutely.
So every major education reform has been bipartisan. And it really, the sort of right-wing versus left-wing version of education reform, until really very recently, it'd be hard to say this is a right-wing versus left-wing.
That's right.
Things really changed during the first Trump administration around that. But even some of the big topics like school choice, are very popular on both the left and the right, and unpopular on both the left and the right.
With different pockets. So bottom line, wait and see.
Bottom line, wait and see. I'm hoping there'll be an announcement soon because, he can appoint a new chancellor whenever he wants, but he takes over January 1st, and the kids come back to school the 4th, the 5th. So we want to know who's going to be running the schools.
He'll be in there, right? Welcoming them in the school, coming back. All the photos of him at this front school door, shaking hands.
Maybe,
right? Maybe, we don't know.
I have no idea.
So what I think we have to do is come back in 6 months and do a sort of retrospective, or where are we, and who it is, and what do we think then?
And what's happening.
We're going to commit to that?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Judith, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to What's the Issue from the Mark School at Baruch College. Follow the Mark School on social media at Baruch Marks, and join us next time as we continue to examine the ideas and debates that matter today.